April is National Poetry Month, and to celebrate this month, I want to share with you some of my favorite Irish poems, both in Irish language and in English. Today, we'll start with a poem by the great William Butler Yeats. This poem is called The Song of Wandering Aengus, and Yeats published it in 1899 in a book called The Wind Among the Reeds. It's a poem of love and loss and time and inspiration, and it's marked by a kind of mysticism that stirs the heart. I'll say the poem for you, and then afterward we'll talk it over. The Song of Wandering Aengus. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand, and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing, and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream, and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled by the door, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossoms in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded in the brightening air. When I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone, and kiss her lips and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. Isn't that a beauty? Now, there's so much nourishment and thought and inspiration in that poem, and I'd like to start with actually just the inspiration part. I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head. That is one of the most vivid poetic portrayals of inspiration I have ever run across. A fire in your head. I know you know what that feels like. I do too. And it's special in this poem that Yeats goes out to the hazelwood because, according to Irish tradition, the hazel is what feeds the salmon of wisdom, the braddan fasa. And the braddan fasa, the salmon of wisdom, is eventually eaten by Finn McCool, who becomes the great warrior and poet. So going out to the hazelwood with the fire in your head is sort of inspiration on inspiration. And then dropping your line to catch something. So to create literally a fishing pole, and to go fishing, and to drop your line into the stream and catch a little silver trout. It's not a salmon, because salmon is pretty hard to rhyme, but it's a trout. So it is a kind of fish of poetic inspiration. This is something I think we can take to heart, is just noticing ourselves when that feeling comes upon us, not shooing it away, not waiting for later, but acting on it, because that is when we catch the salmon of inspiration, or poetry, or a good idea. So that's the first thing that I see in this poem, is it's a poem about inspiration. It's also a poem about love and the way that we can find it and lose it. The title references the Song of Wandering Aengus. It references Aengus. And Aengus is the closest thing we have in early Ireland, in the early Irish pantheon, to a love god. Now, there's a very early tale, or it's an old Irish tale, it's kind of in a medieval manuscript, called Aisling Aengusa, which means the vision or the dream of Aengus. And I'll just give you a potted version of it, but it will help you understand the poem a little bit. Aengus went to sleep one night, and a beautiful girl appeared to him in his dreams, and she was playing a musical instrument, and he was dazzled. And she came to him for several nights in a row, And eventually people started to notice that he looked as though he were declining. During the day, he was feverish and pale. At night, he could hardly wait to go to sleep to see this girl, but he could never speak with her. He could never sort of catch her. And so one after another, all kinds of experts in the kingdom were called in to help Aengus, his mother, his father, a number of physicians. And finally, it was the king of a fairy mound who lets Aengus know that they know who that girl is and that she's in a somewhat precarious position. One thing leads to another. The whole kingdom is out looking for this girl, and it turns out that her name is Cyr, which means sort of a berry, and she is in swan form on a lake. And Aengus is brought to the lake and has to promise this Cyr that he will turn into a swan every other year. They will spend in swan form, and the other years they'll spend in human form. So the upshot of all of that is that this young man has to change. Love changes him. And we see that here in this poem as well, that she ran and faded in the brightening air. She's gone. He's had this experience of love, but away she goes. But, and here's, I think, a beautiful thing. This is an empowering view of aging and of life itself. If we are fortunate enough to survive to middle age and beyond, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands, right? When I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands. Now that's an interesting reference right there. Yeats is saying, once I've lived my life and I've been in the hollow lands, and we might see that as a reference to the hollow hills of Ireland, which are the places where fairies are reported to live. So the hollow lands and hilly lands are, to me, a kind of way of saying, I'll have wandered through a lifetime of enchantment and this world. And at the end of all of that, I'll know how to find her. And when I find her, I will take her by the hand and we'll be united. So there's a sort of a beautiful full circle of coming round in this poem, that by the time you have reached an age, you'll have what you need. And then he says, and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done, the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. And to me, those silver apples and golden apples, they're mythic apples, but they also reference a folk practice of La Bealtaine, of May Day, which is a sort of a processional custom where people would come around door to door, often carrying a kind of May bush, which would be like a branch, and on it were hung gold and silver balls. So they might have covered balls with gold or silver foil, and those were meant to be the moon and the sun. And I think what they were saying in that was, there's the totality of life, the spherical, encompassing totality of life. And that was a kind of blessing to come door to door in this processional custom. I think here it is too for Yeats. He's saying the light and the dark, the shadow and the brightness, the everything. So if you are fortunate enough to continue living, you may get your heart's desire, and you may achieve this kind of understanding and this experience of that everythingness that is there in his poem. So I hope you enjoyed that, the Song of Wandering Aengus. Please, if you do, like this video, if you will, share it with someone who might like this poem and the way we're talking about it. And also, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear from you. What is your own response to this poem? What does it bring up for you? Share it with us in the comments. I love to see what you share. So thank you so much for being with me this week, and I'll see you next week for more poetry. Slán na nish.